Welcome everybody to Beyond Crises, 9 Takeaways for Reimagining Our Communities, Schools, and Classrooms. My name is Leticia Trower, and I'm going to introduce your speakers for the day. Dr. Debbie Zacarian of Zacarian and Associates brings 3 decades of experience as a district leader, university faculty, and educational service agency program director. She works with state and national agencies, school districts, and universities, and provides professional development throughout the United States. Debbie has written and co-written books and consulting services, focusing on strengths-based leadership and instructional practices with culturally and linguistically diverse students. Dr. Margarita Calderón is Professor Emerita and Senior Research Scientist at Johns Hopkins University. Margarita and her associates are dedicated to bringing success to English learners or multilingual learners with whole school, Excel, and Acelera programs in Spanish and English K-12 schools throughout the country. Margarita has over 100 research and magazine articles and book publications on language, literacy, and content integration. Margo Gottlieb, co-founder and lead developer of WIDA, is a teacher at heart and a fierce advocate of multilingual learners. She's had the privilege of working with thousands of educators across the United States and throughout the world. Margo is proud to be an author and co-author of over 20 books and guides on assessment, curriculum design, and standards. So without further ado, I will turn it over to your speakers for the evening.
Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Zacarian, and I'm delighted to be here with you and equity warriors Margarita Calderón and Margo Gottlieb. We are thrilled that you've joined us as we explore takeaways for reimagining communities, schools, and classrooms to overcome the inequities that we know have occurred for years and are amplified when we experience crises. We see crises, whatever these might be, as an incredible opportunity for reimagining, or really imagining what can and is being done by working together, by really being in it together. Like the school principal who drove to each graduating student to hand deliver their diploma months into the pandemic. Like the teacher who went to her students' homes to sit on the front stoops at a distance. And like the school superintendent who personally delivered a Chromebook to my nephew just after the pandemic began. All of these educators did this and do this to let their students know how much we care for and about them. Whatever the crises, we learn a lot when we band together because we know that we're not silos unto ourselves. We are part of a larger whole that's interconnected, interrelated, and even interdependent. The big 3, as we refer to them, that is our families and our local communities, our schools and districts, and our classrooms. They hold great power together in helping us to overcome inequities with multilingual learners. Today, we're going to talk about how we can make and realize these 9 takeaways that we're going to talk about. So let's look at what we mean. For years, the fields of psychology, psychiatry, social work, and education looked at what was wrong, like the pieces of glass depicted here on the left. When we looked at these perceived pieces of broken glass, that is, when we looked at what we perceived was wrong with our students, and we treated the problem by finding remedies for it, that deficit-based view of multicultural, multilingual students led to many, many negative outcomes. However, for the past 3 decades, an overwhelming amount of research has shown that if we take time to shift our patterns of thinking away from what we perceive as deficits to looking for our students' many, and their families' many personal, social, cultural, and linguistic strengths, and take as much time to acknowledge these, we have a much better chance for students to be successful and value their strengths as the unique mosaic that is theirs. Interactions are such a critical component of development, and we've learned so much from how important interactions are during the crises. Consider this. When a child is born, the first person or people that a baby communicates with are its parents or guardians. Their rich interactions form that child-parent bond. And as the child grows, they bond with their family community, like their family's neighbors, the people in the markets that they shop, by engaging in ever-growing, ever-familiar interactions. And then children come to us, their school community, where we're expected to enact the same type of caring for and about children as their families have. A child's development is dependent on all of these circles of influence continually as they grow and expand in powerful ways. So as we've all seen during the pandemic, and hopefully beyond it to overcome inequities, learning does not occur in classrooms alone or in a silo. Children engage in so many rich interactions that support their health, their well-being, after and out of school interests and talents, and their learning. Like the time my husband, who's an entomologist, went to our daughter's classroom to share information about monarch butterflies. Like when we took our kids to their pediatrician and sat on the bleachers through their elementary and secondary years while they played sports. Like the virtual potluck supper that contributor Michael Silverstone held with his second graders during the pandemic to build that classroom sense of community. These experiences reflect what a lot of us do to support our children. So think about this. Think about how we all support those types of rich interactions to occur. In the chat box, list activities that you're involved with to support your child or your family, or that your family engaged with you, to support your health, your well-being, to support you in after and out of school activities, and to support your engaging in school or classroom-based activities. Just jot down in the chat box as many activities as you can, and let's see what each other has to say. Someone writes game night, family time, family meetings to solve issues, all of those, so true. So let's talk about multilingual learners. And as you think about all the activities that you involve your children, or that your parents involved you in terms of your health and well-being, how you engaged in after and out of school activities, and the types of activities that you engaged with your child's classroom teacher or school, let's think about multilingual learners. In the chat box, do you believe that multilingual learners in your school or your district are involved in the very same health and well-being, after and out of school, and classroom-based activities that you either thought about or you listed? Your response in the chat box. As we can see from our responses that we've gotten in, and as we think about this, and what the research shows, is that our responses show us that multilingual learners are not interacting at the same levels as their peers, and most importantly, that are needed. But let's go forward and look a bit more at what is being done and what we can learn from the schools and that we visited during the writing of this book, and what schools are doing to support that high level of interactions that are needed. So here we have 3 districts. Our book includes many more amazing contributions from people who work for various schools and districts across the country, who share with us what they do to positively move beyond crises, to overcome inequities by expanding the high volume of interactions that their students engage in their schools, after and out of school, and with families and their community. So let's look at this. A strength-based approach includes one in which students and families are truly empowered, that they interact and they engage with us and with each other. For example, at Wolf Street School in Baltimore, a myriad of remote and after and out of school activities were implemented shortly after COVID began. These included robotics, yoga, art, theater, and debate. This summer, their principal, Mark Gaither, just shared with me today that they're looking at ramping up home visits to reconnect with families. They don't have any goal but to say hello, ask how families are, and talk about the work that they did this year and how they're so looking forward to next year. Think about the power of interacting that Wolf Street is going to be doing this summer in Baltimore. At Salina Elementary School in Dearborn, Michigan, its outreach worker and its principal and others banded together with the community to ensure that students had classroom supplies and food during the crisis, especially as they learned virtually. As a school, their principal shares with us that when school resumes in the fall, they want to provide more opportunities for interaction, especially on helping their students, many of whom are refugees, overcome the stress and trauma that they've experienced as a result of the pandemic. Another example is Brockton High School. Brockton was one of the hardest hit cities in my state, Massachusetts. A priority of its superintendent, Mike Thomas, is to support the physical and social emotional well-being of its students, despite the many budget reductions that it's encountered over the most recent years and year after year. Mike knows the importance of relationships. During the height of the pandemic, for example, the district purchased smartphones in response to its need to maintain the relationships that it had and the reality that most families preferred speaking by phone. In addition, the city has become more attuned with what families need. It started a call center during the pandemic and a tech center staffed with bilingual, bicultural support staff. And in addition, the city has become more and more diverse over the more recent years. And in its support of its multilingual, multicultural community, its high school began a medical interpreter and translation program. In response, the high school implemented this program so that when students graduate, you can see a picture of how many graduated here, they have this high level of professional capability to provide translations and interpretation for families that go to either health centers or hospitals. Now they're considering adding a new legal interpretation course for students who want to enter into, and this is translator course for multilingual learners who are interested in going into law enforcement, politics, or any other field related to the legal system. Imagine the power these school community services will bring. These three districts show us what's possible by drawing from everyone's strengths and assets. The important takeaways are these three. First, create an asset-based team of strength-based members who will help us to build family and community partners with our schools or districts. Second, and in the book, we provide, if we want to provide a strength-based team, like I'm talking about in the book, we provide a tool for that. Second, meet with that team to identify the needs and desires of our multilingual learners, just like our three districts did. And in our book, we provide a tool or protocol for that. Third, build asset-based partners who really understand the importance of acknowledging and valuing our students, their families, and their own assets. The three examples I shared show that these types of collaborations, real partnerships, are at the very heart of moving beyond crises. They help us to see that it is so important to really be interconnected, interdependent, and to really support these tremendous circles of influence. Now we're going to turn to my colleague Margarita to learn about our second sphere or second element, the schools. Margarita?
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. Yes, for setting the tone. And I'd like to now share some takeaways to build a collaborative culture for English learners, multilingual learners, as the focus in a whole school. My three tips or takeaways are, first of all, some tips that 4 successful principals have shared in the book, and I'll synthesize some of that, but also the emphasis that they give in new ways of teaching and co-teaching, and also how they go about designing their comprehensive whole school approach to professional development. So I'll start with their challenges, the challenges that they're working on and that they would like to share with you, and invite you to also make these challenges to learn more about your students. We can never learn enough. To promote ample interaction between teacher and students and among students. Students are not talking enough. Else are not talking enough. So we need to get them to talk some more. And also to learn language strategies that build knowledge, reading comprehension, writing skills, and social emotional support. Because, after COVID, they have found out, and they're recommending that everyone look into vocabulary as critically important post-COVID. Why? Because we know that a large vocabulary frequently sets high achieving students apart from less successful ones. And that the average 6-year-old comes to school speaking 8,000 words, but also learns 3,000 to 5,000 more per year in order to have a verbal command of at least 50,000 words at the end of high school in order to be college and career ready. And so this is one of the big recommendations. Because the research tells us that the number of words that students have mastered by the end of 1st grade is a significant predictor of reading comprehension or reading problems in middle and high school. The other recommendation that they are making is that we should be integrating and teaching language literacy and content. That vocabulary is not an end in itself, but rather it's part of reading and writing, and that social emotional learning is not something to be done at the beginning of class or at the end of the day, but rather as you can see there, that little container has oil, aceitito of cell, and those drops are the oil that make the spokes continue to go around very smoothly. The other recommendation is something that they recognized, and I think a lot of us have known this for many, many years, is that one ESL teacher cannot do this alone anymore. It takes everyone, all the core content teachers, all the general education teachers need to be also feeling that onus, that responsibility for the else. And so the plan for next year is to design more 50-50 type contributions between ESL teachers and core content teachers. So even when an ESL teacher is in a writing, is in a science class, for instance, and they're preparing for a writing paper, the ESL teacher takes on the role of pre-teaching vocabulary, specifically tier 2 words, the core science teacher models the writing that is wanted in the classroom, and then they continue to trade and share the roles between different aspects of writing that they model and that they help the students understand what the end product should be. And then both ESL and co-teachers do a lot of the monitoring as well as collecting performance-based data on the ELs as they're going through this. They monitor even when they're in the breakout rooms. So for this, the four schools are recommending that there be a whole school focus on learning for everyone at the school, that every teacher, administrator, counselor also go through something like this, even though counselors may not be selecting words to teach, but they certainly need to know what type of language they can use to make sure that they're communicating effectively with the English learners, with the newcomers. And then even reading comprehension, writing, integrating social emotional into everything that administrators, counselors, coaches, teachers do throughout, cafeteria workers and everyone. And so the administrators see their role as implementing this whole school professional development, and that the professional development is also for, like I said, for everyone. And so they participate in the PD with the teachers, and they make sure that quality implementation in every classroom. And most of all, their messages are that, yes, we have to comply, and we've always been talking about compliance, but it's time to move from compliance to excellence. And the only way that we're going to achieve excellence is to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So here we see beyond crises type of professional development that they're already planning, a whole school commitment to multilingual learners, their success. And so everyone participates, everyone takes ownership. And this is what the principals and then a couple of language specialists are writing in the book to make very specific recommendations as to how do we go about doing this, and how do we design, and here are some checklists that you can use to go through all these different pieces. So they have a lot of good information to share with you about this. But there's also a lot of great information at the classroom level. And so now Margo is going to share that with us.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Margarita. And as Margarita just said, we're moving into the third ecosystem. We started with communities, and then we moved to schools. But now here's the heart of teaching and learning. It's in the classroom. So as we move beyond the pandemic, let's think about how we can capture the superpowers of our students within our classrooms, because hopefully they'll be rejoining us in the fall. How can we accentuate their languages, their cultures, their histories, the positive relationships that you have established with them that are coming from their homes and communities? And for older students, how might we foster their belonging that is so attached to social and peer connections? What can we do? So think about it. As we enter the 21-22 school year, that's hard to say, how might we secure the superpowers of our incoming multilingual learners? Let's think about it. Together, we can all complete an interest survey what are the passions of our multilingual learners? What do they want to learn about? Where are they coming from? What do they already know? How do multilingual learners use their home language? With whom? What topics do they discuss? And the same thing goes for English. So think about it. Our students that represent communities, and that's our next slide. So here, as educators, we over the last year and a half, we've become much more dependent on community supports and the services they can provide for our multilingual learners and their families. So we have to think about, as we move into the next school year, how can we leverage these relationships? How can we bring them into our classrooms? How can we tap the capital of our multilingual learners and their families? How can they continue to learn in languages other than the English? How can we enrich their lives by bringing their lives into our classrooms? And so during the pandemic, we have become so interdependent with families. And so you'll see in the next slide that those of you who don't know Spanish, this is from happens to be from a bakery in Bogota, Colombia. And it says, we believe in families. And it's the families that are responsible for all the good things that happen in life. And we as educators believe that as well. And we want to make sure that that is integral to what we do every day. We want to make sure that our multilingual learners are safe and that our families are co-educators in this process. We want this tradition that we've established during the crisis, and as probably one of the more beneficial aspects that have come from the many crises that we have endured of the last couple of years, we want to bring the expertise of families to add to the richness to school and to classrooms. So that's what we want to do. Where can we begin? And so if you enter a school, in the next slide, we want our multilingual learners to be able to have those opportunities to make the connections among their communities, bring them and their families to schools and their classrooms. So this is a mural that I happened to see when I walked in a school in Jakarta, Indonesia. And it's so brilliantly reflective of the community that surrounds these multilingual learners and illustrates the culture that highlights their community, that I thought, that's what's important. That's what we have to do. We have to retain what's important to our multilingual learners, who they are and how they choose to express themselves, whether it's more literacy dependent modes of expression or those artistically, visually, and think about what is their sense of belonging. How can we bring unity to our multilingual community as a whole and to our communities of practice in our classrooms? So think about it. Many of you are administrators, you all are teachers. And so in the next slide, here you are juggling so many pieces, so many issues. And you have to think about, so, oh my heavens, look at all that we have dealt with, all the pressure we have felt, all the anxiety, all the trauma that we have dealt with. So what if we have more distributive leadership so that our coaches and that our teacher leaders can share in the decision-making? Think about that. How can our schools and classrooms be welcoming for our multilingual learners? What can we do as a school leadership, as grade level teams, as departments? What can we do for our multilingual learners so they are interacting with each other and with us? And so together, as a school community and as a classroom community, we all can start engaging in these courageous conversations, because there's a lot to unpack this new school year. So if you go into the classroom, which is the next slide, soon our students are going to be back. So think about how you might co-construct learning goals with your multilingual learners. So it is a collaborative activity. How together can you create learning opportunities for your multilingual learners in which our students will be more motivated and engaged? How can you reach out, as I mentioned before, and represent all these modes of learning, visual, digital, graphic, as well as literacy skills, to allow for multiple ways or multimodal ways of showing evidence of learning? How can we, as shown in this picture, display original student work that is reflective of our students' languages, cultures, and their identities? It's so critical. And we have to admit, as we look into the next slide, that classroom life has changed drastically. And teachers have had to pivot instantaneously. We've had to reconfigure learning environments from in person to online to hybrid to remote, back to hybrid, back to in person. What are we to do? We are super teachers. We as teachers and educators should applaud ourselves because we too have those superpowers. But now we have to make that transition to make the classroom again the center or the focus for student-driven activities. What can we do? How can we engage our multilingual learners in project-based activities? How can we coalesce all the efforts of the last year and a half to bring home, community, schools, and classrooms closer together? And so let's look at the next slide, because I think this really captures what we want in our classrooms. And it says, you can read it along with me, in the equitable classroom. And that's what we're aiming to unearth, uncover, overcome. All these inequities that our multilingual learners have faced. How can we make their learning more equitable? So we want our multilingual learners, as well as all students, to leave our classrooms knowing the content so well that they, in essence, become the teachers, and they can use it to help others to create very rich and meaningful sense-making that becomes part of their lives, and not something that they leave when they leave the classrooms, but they can make that connection back to their home and their community. So we want students to become agents of their own learning. We want, as teachers, as superpower teachers, to empower our students, to have them have these opportunities to use the language of their choice when they're interacting with others. And so we want our students to be secure, to feel that they really belong. And so here are the last 3 takeaways. Number 7, we want you to be able to create and expand learning opportunities in order to optimize interaction among students. And that is students interacting with other students, perhaps partners of a shared home language, or just think, pair, share amongst anybody in your classroom. For that duad to be a triad and interact among 3 children, and then to form small groups until everyone feels comfortable and can work as a community together as a whole class. For older students to have Socratic seminars, or for all students to engage in academic conversations. What's most important, though, in number 7 is that our students should be engaging in meaningful activities, and they can make connections back to their own lives and experiences. In number 8, we want our students to be able to co-construct goals, something I mentioned just a little while ago, with teachers, goals to further their learning. along with the goals, what kind of evidence are they going to use to illustrate that learning that has occurred with other students? So in number 8, you might think about how can you have students lead conferences with yourselves as teachers? How can they bring in family members? How they can, and what kinds of evidence are they going to use to show you that they are making progress towards meeting their goals? What is their preferred mode of communication? Make sure that's captured as you create these goals at the beginning of the school year. And number 9, something that I think I've reiterated so much, it already resonates with you, if not beforehand. And that is, we need to connect learning to our students' lived experiences, their language, their cultures, and their identities. And so we need to jumpstart our units of learning and their individually related lessons with student voice. We have to show their interests, how multilingual learners can connect to that theme, how we can use multilingual learners' perspectives within that unit of learning, and how our multilingual learners will help exemplify the concepts that are learning through their own lived experiences. And so if we look at our multilingual learners interacting with each other, which is the next slide, we want to make sure that we're optimizing learning opportunities for all of them. So think about it. One thing that has become so relevant and so evident is that we have to integrate digital literacy into our teaching and learning. This is a physical book, but look what kids have done over the last year and a half. How can we bring in iPads and those Chromebooks and programs that make a difference for our multilingual learners? Because we're much more interrelated and interdependent than ever before. So let our multilingual learners be the center of our global outreach. Let them connect to other multilingual learners around the world. It has shrunk over the last year and a half. We have these shared visions for what is learning. And wouldn't it be nice to do that internationally? Okay, we all need talking buddies. And so think about, as we come to a close, and if you go to the next slide, Margarita, this is how we might want to recap our message out to you today. We want to be able, as a collective, to move beyond crises. One thing for sure, we want to sustain the relationships that we've carved out so preciously over the last year and a half with our communities, with our families, to ensure that our families are getting the food they need, that they are part of the social networking, that they have the medical services that they need. We can't relinquish that. But we also think it's really important, as families engage with outside services, that they also bring their expertise into the school, and they can advocate on behalf of their own children as you advocate for them. So you have the shared interests. And then finally, we want to make sure that our multilingual learners can thrive in a post-COVID world. Because look at what we have gained, not what we have lost. And we want to make sure that our multilingual learners are really highlighted, that they have ownership and they have all these new strategies that they can use to further their own learning and take responsibility for it. Our classrooms have come together. Our schools have come together. Our communities have come together. Let's not lose that. So I'm going to end with a comment that's in the book from Jennifer Savage, who is a literacy coach from Charleston, South Carolina, who 6 months ago, when we were writing the book, although much has changed, she imagined her classroom in a post-COVID world. And this is what she said. And I'm going to read it directly. I think the pandemic has spotlighted the role of schools as being pillars in our communities, not just for education, but for the community and the teaching of social emotional skills and values. In this post-COVID classroom, I envision a lot more time and space for reflection and integration of feelings and experiences. This time has reminded me of what is truly important, that we are raising human beings over everything else. So we need to give them the space to process their own thoughts, feelings, emotions, and thinking about the criticality of learning. I believe that many shadows and injustices in our society have been brought to light during this time, haven't we all? And I have made the commitment to make sure I am always examining and re-examining my own biases and listening and learning so I can do a better job for my students as well as myself. So therefore, in my post-COVID classroom, it's going to be one that feels more diverse, more inclusive, and more equitable. I hope that you take this message and can make your classrooms more equitable as well. And so thank you for joining us today. And the last slide we have to say as a trio is that, are you up for this challenge? Last year and the year before has been so tremendous in terms of challenging our identities as educators and expanding the scope of what we can do, especially what we can do for our multilingual learners. Let's continue this fight. Let's continue to overcome linguistic and cultural inequities for our multilingual learners. And here's how you might contact us post-webinar.